Al-Aruri is the most senior Hamas member killed since the start of the war nearly 3 months ago. I want to talk about all of this and the latest developments here, so let's bring in Avi Melamed, a former Israeli intelligence official and founder of Inside the Middle East Institute. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and break down the latest details.
Hello, Josh. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, just tell me about the significance of the killing of this Hamas official and essentially why Israel is on high alert at this hour.
Well, Salah al-Aruri was a very senior official within Hamas. He was, in fact, responsible for the whole military apparatus of Hamas in the West Bank. The man was in charge of many terror attacks against Israelis. He was the liaison person between Hamas, the Iranians, and the Hezbollah and other Iranian-backed militias in the area. So you can understand he was a very senior official. So taking down somebody like that is already for itself a major blow. The interesting aspect about this event, the killing of Al-Aruri last night in Beirut, was that though it was reported in different media that he was killed in Hamas office in Beirut, apparently it seems like he was killed in what was supposed to be a safe house, meaning an apartment that nobody knows really about. The fact that he was killed in that specific location obviously indicates that there was a very accurate intelligence in the hands of those who perpetuate this action. Now, as for the question, the other part of the question that you asked me, Al-Aruri went or moved to Beirut, to Lebanon, a couple of months ago. He was stationed for a long period of time in Turkey. From there, he was guiding a lot of the terror attacks of Hamas, and then he moved to Lebanon. And actually, he was staying as a special guest of the Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. He was, to a large extent, under his shelter, sort of speaking. And he was based in the southern quarter of Beirut, the Dahya al-Janubiyya, which is the stronghold of Hezbollah in Lebanon. So eliminating Aruri in the very heart of the stronghold of the Hezbollah in Lebanon obviously is not only a major blow to Hamas, it's very painful insult and embarrassment caused to Hezbollah and its leader, Nasrallah.
And one thing that's interesting to note is that we did hear from, the leader of Hezbollah, who did say that they are vowing revenge for any sort of situation that does play out where Israel is responsible for targeting a Palestinian official. Do you think that Israel is going to take that threat seriously?
Yes, Israel is taking this threat seriously, but we have to remember the wider context. Right now, we are engaged in an ongoing skirmish of, exchanging punches, sort of speaking, with Hezbollah along the Israeli-Lebanese border. So we are already in a situation which is tense and has the potential to further escalate. However, it seems like that the Hezbollah, to the best of our evaluation, doesn't really have an interest to be engaged in a full-scale war with Israel. Obviously not particularly just because Hamas militant senior person was eliminated inside Hezbollah's stronghold. That for itself is not good enough of a reason to drag Hezbollah to a war with Israel. And we have to remember the Hezbollah's bosses, the regime in Tehran, obviously will not go to a war over something like that, the killing of Hamas senior leader. But just the same, Israel is and should take very seriously Hezbollah's threats. It's very likely that the Hezbollah, once again, will use subcontractors in the south part of Lebanon, namely Hamas affiliated military power that exists in South Lebanon, or Islamic Jihad, or both, to carry out some sort of retaliation. But we have to be very clear about it. Nothing happens in South Lebanon without the approval and the consent of the Hezbollah. So anything that comes from South Lebanon is either in a form of retaliation or further escalation is, in the end of the day, under the auspice of Hezbollah. It's likely that the Hezbollah will allow, so speaking, some sort of retaliation, but it will restrict the scale and measurements of those that kind of retaliation.
I want to talk about the tunnels that are underneath Gaza. We've talked a lot about this and how complex they are, and those are, of course, Hamas tunnels, but there hasn't been a lot of discussion about the Hezbollah tunnels, and some experts have said that those could be even more complex. So what role could that play in the war here, as, of course, it could heat up between Israel and Hezbollah as well?
Yes, Josh, the challenge of the tunnels, as you accurately indicated, is very significant also when you talk about Lebanon. We know that in Lebanon, the Hezbollah is applying this whole system of tunnels for similar purposes like Hamas, namely enabling movement of militants, command and control rooms that are supposed to be sheltered from Israeli aerial bombardments and so on. And one of the significant aspects of those tunnels, which, by the way, are in any kind of scale, are much more developed in comparison to the Hamas tunnel. We are looking at Hezbollah's tunnel. I just recently saw a video coming from one of those tunnels. These tunnels are 10 times more sophisticated, I would say, than the one we saw in Gaza Strip. And just as a reminder, we all should remind ourselves that a couple of years ago, Israel has exposed a network of tunnels Hezbollah was in the middle of digging from the Lebanese area, infiltrating to the Israeli area, and that also, of course, indicates Hezbollah's advanced capacities in the context of those tunnels. It is also estimated, by the way, that the Hezbollah using those tunnels to store its heavy rockets, its long-range missiles, accurate rockets that he has in his possession. So, in any perspective, from any angle, those tunnels are a very significant military establishment Hezbollah is using.
We've heard that the IDF is kind of, I don't know if you want to say winding down some of its efforts there over in Gaza. They're removing troops. Obviously, the fighting is still going to continue, as the IDF does say that the war is expected to continue until at least the end of this year. So it is ongoing, but some of those troops are being removed from Gaza. Why do you think that is?
I think it's in collidence with, it's going along with the Israeli master plan, sort of speaking, of managing this war, because we are kind of seemingly getting close to the end of this phase of the war, which was mainly characterized by the use of this very massive military power, incorporating, by the way, massive aerial support. And it seems like as we are moving towards the end of this phase, which is likely to take place, I would say, in the next couple of weeks, we are now moving to a second phase of this whole military plan. And that second phase, I would say, characterizes by three major elements. One is to clean, sort of speaking, the remains of Hamas infrastructure in the areas in Gaza Strip that has been already, to a large extent, decisively won by the IDF, namely, particularly the northern part of Gaza Strip, the Gaza City and its vicinities. This is one perspective. This is one objective. The other objective is to tighten the strangling loop around Khan Yunis, the stronghold, the birthplace of Hamas, where, according to some estimations, there are massive tunnels in Khan Yunis where it seems like the major leaders of Hamas and apparently Israeli hostages are located right now in those specific tunnels in Khan Yunis. And I would say that the third location that Israel is more and more diverting its attention to is the Gaza-Egypt border line. There is a line that goes in parallel to the border line. This path is known by the name of the Philadelphia path. And this is actually one of the most significant areas. Why? Because during all those years that Hamas ruled Gaza Strip, Hamas dug an enormous network of smuggling tunnels that basically goes beneath the Gaza-Egypt border, connecting Gaza Strip with the northern part of Sinai Peninsula. And those tunnels have been the major oxygen pipeline for years, providing Hamas with commodities, with weapons, with ammunition, you can just name it. And so there is understanding that there is also a very significant need to address that specific challenge of the network of tunnels. Though the Egyptians have destroyed many of those tunnels, it seems like they are still keeping on being a very significant part of Hamas operational mode. So these are, I would say, the three major locations the Israeli master military plan is now focused at, and the requirement or the means needed to take care of those issues are differently in terms of scales, the military power that you have to use, and so on and so on. So I would say that this is one major explanation to the fact that Israel is kind of like diluting some of its major military power in Gaza Strip because of the change in nature of the targets ahead.
And I want to ask you about a situation developing over in Turkey. That is where 33 suspected Israeli Mossad agents have been arrested by Turkey. What does that say to you? Does it show that Turkey feels threatened by Israel right now?
No, I don't think that that's the situation. Generally, when we talk about Turkey, we mostly have to remember we are talking about Erdogan. Erdogan is a very sophisticated and cynical leader. He's playing among many other things, he's playing the card of the Palestinian and Israeli conflict as its wish. So he has been positioning himself for a long period of time as the sponsor and patron and the supporter of Hamas. Then when wind were changed, he also changed his skin, and then the next day he basically kicked Hamas people out of Turkey. Now, once again, he's trying to ride this pony that is called the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Gaza Strip. And everything that comes to do with Erdogan and what's going on in Turkey, I will take with a lot of grain of salt, because we know that many times Erdogan, and not for the first time, is actually for its own inner political purposes, is kind of like using the story of the Israelis or the Israeli Palestinians or the Mossad, like in that specific issue, basically as a cover-up to some of its inner political interest, of its inner political objectives. For example, if he wants to remove from power, or if he wants to shut down or to oppress opponents of opposition in Turkey. We all know exactly that Erdogan is not a great, I would say, keeper of human rights. And so he's doing that quite often. So I wouldn't see necessarily anything that basically reflects a Turkish concern about Israel. That's not the case.
All right. And Avi, I do want to ask you about this breaking news that we are following at this hour. Take a look at your screen. This is actually a tweet that is coming in from the Times of Israel as we gather the latest details. But we do know the death toll is rising after explosions at an event marking 4 years since a U.S. airstrike that killed an Iranian general. State-run media there in Iran reporting that at least 73 people have died and nearly 200 others have been wounded. A senior official in Iran calling this a terrorist attack, but did not elaborate there. The blast struck at an event that is honoring the 4th anniversary of the killing of a general in Iran, and this happened at his gravesite over in Kerman, about 500 miles southeast of Iran's capital. What are your thoughts on this situation? What do we know, and what is still left to figure out about all of this?
Well, George, this is indeed a very interesting developing story. A wide context I will put right there. The general we are talking about is Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani was the commander of the Al-Quds Force. Al-Quds Force is the spearhead of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and this is the force that is responsible for nurturing and developing all the militias in the Middle East that are backed by the Iranian regime. Indeed, he was eliminated exactly this day today 4 years ago by the United States in Iraq. Now, the interesting story about this specific incident, I think there are a couple of interesting aspects that should be addressed. First, I think that some people maybe try to jump and to connect that necessarily with last night's attack in Beirut. I would not necessarily see any connection between the two incidents. These are two different, totally separate incidents. This is one thing. The other thing, it's very likely that some people will try to point the finger at Israel, holding Israel responsible for that attack. I would say that to the best of my understanding, Israel is not involved in what happened today in Tehran. In fact, there is a long list of inner domestic Iranian factors that are looking to take revenge of the Iranian regime. Just to name a few, you got the Kurdish underground, you got the people of the Ahwaz, which, by the way, is the area of southwest Iran. You got the people of the Baluchis in Iran. You got many different factors within Iran that hate the Iranian regime, and they have good reasons for that. So there is no lack of local factors in Iran that would like to take opportunity and to do something like that. I would not be surprised if one of those entities will claim responsibility. And one last thing that we have to look at as we are following this developing story is obviously the question whether those attacks were targeting specific individuals, high-ranked senior individuals within the Mullah regime, because that could be a very significant and interesting development. We don't have, for now, a more detailed information other than the fact that there has been a lot of fatalities and casualties. We'll have to follow that because it could be something very significant in terms of ramifications.
All very true. And as you mentioned, a lot left to figure out here. Avi, thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join us and provide a breakdown of the latest details here. Is there anything else you want to add before I let you go?
Well, I would say, once again, just taking our look a little bit to a wider arena and looking at another arena that has been also in the media news very recently and still continue and probably will continue to be in the focus of our media interest, the story of the Houthis in Yemen, the Red Sea. It seems like that the Houthis are not really impressed by the defensive approach of the United States and the allies, the coalition that the United States has assembled, defenders of prosperous, in order to try and to protect maritime transportation in the Red Sea. As time goes by, there is more and more increasing need to more firmly and I would say decisively addressing the challenge that the Houthis are presenting. It's already causing a significant damage to the world globe trade and also to, obviously, regional players. I think this is something that we also have to be very much tuned to and to follow very closely.
All right. Avi Melamed there, former Israeli intelligence official and a friend of the show at this point, helping us to break all of this down. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us. We appreciate it.